Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Matters That Matter. I'm Simran and I'm in a conversation with my mentor, Susie Singh. Today, Susie, I want to talk to you about letting go. Every change we experience in life requires some amount of letting go on our part. And letting go, I've realized, can be something very complex and difficult for a lot of people. And yet, it is something that is not spoken about or addressed much in people's lives because often the advice we get from people is uh, just let go or drop the past, forget about it, move on. But we all know that telling these things to ourselves doesn't really do much for the actual process of letting
Yeah.
go, and we still cling and hold on. So today I want to ask you why it is so difficult for us to let go, and is there if there is a step by step process that we can follow that can help us in letting go.
So, first, I'd like to acknowledge that, yes, I think this is an issue that we've all personally experienced. There have been occasions, I'm sure, there have been in mine, I'm sure there have been in yours too, when we've struggled with something, when we've wanted and craved for something, but we know we need to, for our better, for our good. The head
Yeah.
tells us, no, this is the right thing to do is to just put this in the past, drop it, and move on, but we are unable to do it.
Yeah.
The reason for that is that there is so much of emotional investment. Sometimes there is not just emotional investment, there is time, there is money, there is effort, there are valuable memories invested in that experience.
Hmm.
In this moment, I am thinking of an old movie where this lady comes back to her lover, much after they've broken up, and she says, "Mera kuch saman tumhare paas pada hai."
Hmm.
And to sort of translate that for our English viewers who don't understand Hindi, is that some of my things are left with you, and I've come to retrieve those. And she's not talking about physical belongings. She's talking
Yeah.
about all of her emotional investment that she's left in that relationship or in that experience. So, unless we actually work through the entanglement of all our emotions that are still engaged with that past, it becomes really difficult. It's not a scissor that we can take and that we can cut the cords of attachment and that we can just drop it and move on. And
Yeah.
often there are people who will suggest that, okay, why don't you do a cord cutting? I've had people come to me and saying, ma'am, can you do a cord cutting for us? Because I want to get on and I don't want to think about this relationship. And I tell them, I
Hmm.
said, the cord cutting is effective only if you've done your work first. So, most people may have only just reached the point where they are aware of the head and heart dissonance, where the head is telling them, yes, it's good for you, you need to move on. Staying in this relationship or being obsessive about a certain outcome is not the right thing for you, it's hurting you or harming you, and
Yeah.
yet your heart is not aligning with that. So, because of these entanglements, these emotional and historical attachments, it becomes really difficult for us to extricate ourselves from our past, and we stay on in things, becoming almost obsessive about them. In fact, becoming really panicked about them. The idea of letting go brings up a lot of anxiety in us, and
Yeah.
it really agitates us when we are told just drop it and move on.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, is that panic that we feel when we have to let go, apart from the emotional entanglement and apart from the investment that we've had in what we have to let go of, can it also be because we find a sense of security, and we generally just dread change as a whole?
Change is very difficult for most people. We are humans, are creatures of habit. Even if we are suffering, even if we are really going through a difficult experience, but the experience is known, we're very comfortable with the known.
Hmm.
And we dread moving into an unknown sphere because there is this huge sense of, I don't know what I will encounter there. At least I'm in my comfort zone. And
Yeah.
that comfort zone, however uncomfortable it might be, still seems like a safe experience.
Right. So, despite the discomfort, we stay. Susie, can you walk us through a process that can help us to actually let go of things that we are clinging on to, or we can't seem to let go of, even if we have the intention to? Because the advice of letting go and moving on verbally doesn't do much for people. So, is there a process that can help us?
Yes, this is a process that I have developed, and for years I was asking myself the same question, because when everybody asked me this question, ma'am, but how do I let go? Uh, I struggled with that. I really wanted to be able to give them a toolkit. And the honest truth was, at that point in time, I just didn't have it. I realized through my own experiences, when I was stumbling through those very difficult phases and wanting to let go of something that I was clinging on to, that there wasn't a method. And so this was born out of my need to help people who had asked me that question so frequently. What I realized was that there are really four broad reasons why you're unable to let go. And unless we can work through those four aspects, it is almost impossible, because at an unconscious level, the attachment is going to continue to be really deep. So the first aspect is there is a cost of loss.
Yeah.
I recall there was, working with this person, there was this young lady who was in a amorous relationship with a boy, and they were very fond of each other, except that the boy was not really as well settled as the girl's parents would have wanted him to be, and they were impatient that this girl should get married. So they wanted her to get out of this relationship with this boy. And much as this girl was a very, very, I would say, obedient child, and she wanted to sort of follow her parents' guidance or fall in step with what they wanted, to please them, to do the honorable thing, she was really struggling, and she was not being able to let go of her love interest. And when we examined what was really happening with her there, we found that this child had been brought up in a very controlled environment. She had an extremely controlling mother, and therefore had been subjected to a huge amount of criticism during her growing years. And when she fell in love with this boy seemed to bring to her a deep understanding, a sense of acceptance, a sense of comfort and care. He would, pick her up and drop her from work. She could let her guards down and be this silly, witty person. And, whatever she did was enough for him, but it was never enough for her mother, so to say. So there was a cost of loss in giving up that relationship. She felt that she wasn't going to be wanted. She wasn't going to be acknowledged for the little things that she did. She wasn't going to, feel loved and cared for without having to do very much. She felt enough with this boy. And that was really, really valuable for her, because she never had that experience in her life before. So asking her to give up the one thing that she had craved all her life and found in this boy was literally like asking her to give up everything that she had lived and hoped and dreamt about. It wasn't easy.
Yeah.
So we have to answer the question that what is the cost of loss when we are trying to give up something? For example, when I was working with some other person who was going through a family litigation, and he had invested, many, many years trying to fight that case. And his answer to me was, you're asking me to drop this, but I have spent 15 years of my life I have given to this case. So how can I just let go? How can I sort of surrender? And, not feel so agitated or so involved or so passionate about this thing, even though it was driving him completely nuts. So we have to see that for each one, depending on our unique circumstances, we have to first ask ourselves, what am I losing by giving this up? And then we have to work through that cost of loss. That's the first thing. Then there is the second thing, which is there is always some fearful fantasy around giving up what you have.
Yeah.
And that fearful fantasy could be, for instance, in the girl, the lover that I spoke of, she felt that when she married, she would once again be controlled just like she was controlled by her mother.
Mother, yeah.
And the fear of having a controlling husband was something that she was frightening enough for her to actually not want to ever get married. So that fearful fantasy, unless you let go of that fearful fantasy, we are, as humans, we have our survival instincts are so strong that if we have this subliminal belief that I am going to fall into the trap of a cruel marriage again, you are never going to want to get out of something and align with your parents' wish. So fearful fantasy is something that we have to unravel for ourselves, ask ourselves, what am I so terrified? What could probably happen if I gave this
Let
up?
go.
Yeah. Then there is always a subtle condition in our heads. And that is a kind of transaction which we usually are not aware of. And that transaction is when something happens, then I will let go. There is always a condition.
Yeah.
For this girl, she kept saying that when my parents make me meet a suitor who understands me and makes me feel as comfortable as this boy I'm comfortable with or I'm in a relationship with, then I will be willing to let go of this relationship. Unfortunately, that's not how life works. You can't have an insurance or an indemnity against what could possibly happen in the future. And that is one of the reasons why, even though you may cut contact with your ex, but you continue to either text him or message him, you don't sever the contact completely. You don't block him off from all of your social media. You will surreptitiously fool your mind and keep at least one channel of communication open.
Yeah.
So you may block him on three platforms and not block him on one platform, because somewhere you're doing this barter in your own head and saying, okay, I'm being a good person and I'm calling it off because my head tells me I should call it off, but I know I've kept a backdoor entry open. So that's the third thing that we have to figure out, what is the condition that our subconscious mind has set up for us that is preventing us from moving out of this, whatever it is that we are choosing to let go of. And finally, there's a fourth thing, which is there is always a sense of injustice or there is a sense of attachment. And in this girl's case, the injustice, she was very angry with God. And she said, all my life, I have felt so unwanted. And now that you made me fall in love with a guy that my parents don't approve of. There was a huge sense of injustice there. That why couldn't this boy have been someone who would have met my parents' approval? Or why couldn't I have fallen in love with a guy who was doing better or who matched my family's equations and that my parents didn't object to?
Yeah.
So that injustice of it, that anger with God kept her again entrapped, because somehow she feels she's been wronged by God.
Right.
And these four things, giving up that, unless you give up this sense of injustice or this deep sense of attachment you have to something, you are not going to be able to let go. And it is horrifying. Sometimes we find, even when our loved ones have moved on, you can see that the dining table will still be set for that one person who's no longer there. For years after somebody's moved on, their rooms will be maintained in exactly the way as if they were a living thing. So just from being in a relationship with someone to grieving about someone's death, to be able to give up your obsession about some litigation you may be following, or an obsession about certain spiritual practices that you may be having. I mean, it's a vast canvas of
Yeah.
why we are not able to give up the things that we get so hooked into. But unless we release these 4 hooks that I've spoken of, it becomes really, really difficult. So, just to run through them once again, there is the first one, which is the cost of loss. There is the fearful fantasy. There is the condition, the unconscious condition in our mind, and there is the sense of injustice or attachment. And we have to remove all of these 4 hooks, work through them in our mind before we can find the freedom to let go.
Right. So, just to clarify, the last point you spoke about injustice or the attachment we have to a certain situation in our life. Sometimes you get stuck on why me, or why did this happen to me, or you replay the sad story of whatever happened to you. Is it the same as that?
Not necessarily, not necessarily. For example, when I was talking about this person with the litigation, for him, the sense of injustice was the feeling that because someone had not returned his money and it had been a very long duration and it was a large sum of money. So he felt, I have been cheated. And I have been taken for a ride, and that's just not right. And I'm not going to. The condition was I'm not going to be at peace unless until I receive this justice. So it could be different things for different people. It doesn't necessarily have to be the why me syndrome. It just has to be, what is unique to your situation.
That is keeping you hooked.
Yeah.
All right.
Like in another person, for example, there was, just to clarify this point further, there was this feeling, when they were they had a mutual agreement to break up. And when this girlfriend was trying to sort of disengage with the boy, he suddenly started getting very nasty with her. And in the end, that injustice of her criticizing her, running her down, saying rude things, and he was probably doing those things so that he could, let go of his attachment for her. And this is a tactic a lot of young boys employ. But he never realized the impact that it was having on this young girl. And she then got hooked into this idea that unless I win his respect again, unless I am treated with that honor and with that respect that I had experienced when I was in the relationship again, I can't get out of this relationship. So it could be different things for different people.
Right. Thank you so much, Susie, for giving us, I think, 4 very important questions we should ask ourselves if we are struggling with such a situation in our life and struggling to letting go of something. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please write any questions or suggestions if you have for us in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, and we will see you soon.